Now at 8:30, the latest developments from the war in Ukraine as Russia announces it will, quote, scale back military operations in parts of the country. The announcement was met with skepticism by the United States, the White House saying so far it has not seen enough evidence that Russia is scaling back its troops. And Secretary of State Antony Blinken says it is too early to claim Russia is backing down.
We are joined now by former Assistant Secretary of State Robert Charles. Mr. Charles, thanks for joining us tonight. The two sides sat down together today in Istanbul, the Russian and the Ukrainian sides. How do you think the first day went? Do you think there is any prospect for a resolution in this conflict?
Look, I think that we always want a resolution, but I think it's a long way off. The truth is that open source intelligence tells us that they're not moving their troops away from Kiev. They haven't taken Kiev. They are calling up as of, I think, April 1, they're going to call up 100,000 recruits. So their conscription operation is underway. They're pulling troops back from Georgia, Armenia, and Moldova to try to help here. So it's not, they're certainly not giving up. On the other hand, their news is getting sort of bad, going from bad to worse. They've lost 5 generals and an admiral. They just lost a major supply ship in the Black Sea. The morale is low. This is not Syria. This is a situation in which they are trying to topple a government and turn it away. And one of the saddest facts, which only gets worse again by the day, is that they have lost more casualties in a month than they lost in 10 years in Afghanistan. So the news is bad for Putin, and I think that the likelihood is, I would argue, that he'll probably eventually pull back after doing more damage up front, seeing if he can push the envelope, but eventually pull back to the 2 provinces that have the highest amount of energy, which is probably the natural gas and of course the Black Sea port. He's in bad shape right now.
So people who know him and have been around him have said, he's not one to back down. Your assessment then on what his goal is in light of the fact that he's been losing in terms of, well, let me say not losing, but not making his strategy work in Ukraine so far. I mean, you think he will just pull back to those sections of the country that already support him?
Well, look, necessity is the mother of invention. He was going to take all of Ukraine in 3 days, and that didn't happen. Yes, he's a willful guy, and he's an autocrat, and he has a narrative going inside Russia that is intended to reinforce his position. But autocrats reach and reach until they overreach, and when they overreach, they either get toppled or they have to pull back, pull their horns in, and I think he's in that position right now. It's a terrible situation. You indicate that maybe he's not losing, but I think actually objectively he is losing. And I think the end game here is not clear. His end game was, I think, all of Ukraine. His supply lines, his training, his equipment, everything seems to be falling apart. And so I think don't ever count the Russian army out. They will continue to push until the guy in charge says that they shouldn't. But their morale is absolutely low. We're hearing that from every source. And I can't believe that the 100,000 conscripts that will come to this fight at the beginning are really motivated the way the Ukrainians are. The Ukrainians are motivated, the way a rabbit outruns a fox. Ultimately, their life depends on being able to outrun this and perhaps keep the insurgency alive. The aggressor in this case is on weak ground, and I think as the days pass, the morale gets worse. And God knows if the Ukrainians turn some big victory and NATO stays where it is right now, which is essentially supporting them with defensive weapons, I think Russia's news only gets worse by the week.
There was even a report today that Ukrainian forces launched an attack into Russian territory, some kind of a missile or artillery strike at a target in western Russia. And Ukraine is complaining that they still don't have enough weapons, but they seem to be very effective with what they've got. And if they do get more from the United States and NATO, just to follow up on your analysis that Russia is losing, or certainly not making any progress, if they get their hands on even better equipment, could things go south much faster for Russia?
They could, and you raise a really interesting point that has only peripherally been raised by other analysts, but I think it's worth noting that if Russia falters dramatically here and the Ukrainians get some momentum turning opportunity to really push them back, some of what people think of as frozen zones in Georgia, and Moldova in particular, could become unfrozen as those countries say, look, we want to shake loose from this just the way that the Eastern Bloc shook loose from the Soviet Union. And the sad thing here is that really we're talking about a guy in Putin who is he's a former Soviet KGB officer. He's living sort of a past world. He's fighting the last war, and he's not doing it with the Red Army, which actually was well equipped and trained. He's doing it with a Russian army that is under-equipped, under-trained, and frankly not motivated the way the Ukrainians and some of the others that they've subjugated are.
You mentioned the conscripts that he's looking to bring in and fight this fight with Russia. Oil and gas money from many countries is still pouring into Russia. Is that going to buy him some time?
You know, I'll just say this about oil and gas. The sanctions probably need to be tightened right now, because anything that we can do to put the pressure on him to pull back is well worth the effort and should be done sooner rather than later. But it's also true that, again, I'm a little off the mark, but I don't think that we should be cutting a deal with Iran right now, because it not only frees up oil for the world, for them in turn to pursue their own terrorist and nuclear ambitions, but you know that Iran will be a flow through for Russian oil. So it would be a sad day if we're consuming Iranian oil to begin with and then Russian oil through Iran so that we can somehow politically lower the price at the pumps. I think that would be a very bad idea.
We're just about out of time. Last question here. The president said that Putin's got to go, but then walked back the comments that they're not making regime change a policy issue. At the same time, if things keep going south for Putin in Russia, how much longer will those around him tolerate that?
Excellent question, $1 million question. Nobody really knows the answer. I think actually Biden's speech without that one line at the end was a pretty good speech. It was a defense of freedom, whether whether he really stands for that or not. It was a good speech. But the end game, saying that implying that you are going to give him a reason to be defensive because you think that he should be out, and you somehow either have a plan for that or you're willing it to happen, is a bad idea. Look, the bottom line is, if Putin goes, it will be a result of the Russian people's decision that they've had enough of him. He's a powerful autocrat. He has a lot of yes men around him, and I don't think it'll be easy to dislodge him, but I certainly do think it's possible. And the longer this goes, and the more the Russian people have to deal with pine boxes and body bags, the more likely it is they're going to say enough is enough. We're done with this.
Former Assistant Secretary of State Robert Charles, thank you again for your analysis. We appreciate it.
Yes, ma'am.